name is Sarah. My name is Sarah Verbeest, and I am the director of the Jordan Institute for Families at the UNC School of Social Work. And I am joined by our amazing team, Rakai Anderson and Allison De Marco, to bring you the third webinar in our summer series, Working Across Different Strategies for Today. The Jordan Institute Leadership Series was just launched this year as a way for us to make space for important conversations and connections as all of us are experiencing the opportunity to live and work in particularly unusual and challenging times. So we are excited to welcome you here today for a really awesome conversation featuring Alexandra Rose. Next slide. Is there a next slide? Awesome. As we get started, we wanted to start by honoring native lands. We want to acknowledge that this land is Indigenous land and was first inhabited by the first peoples of this land, our American Indian people. This land was stolen from them. North Carolina is home to the largest population than any other state east of the Mississippi River. North Carolina is home to 8 state-recognized tribes, which include the Coharie Indian Tribe, the Hallawasaponi Indian Tribe, the Waccamaw-Siouan Indian Tribe, the Saponi Tribe, the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina, the Meherrin Indian Nation, the Occaneechi Band of Saponi Indian Nation, the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians, and is home to the Tuscarora. We recognize and respect their brilliance, gifts, and contributions, past, present, and future. They are a living legacy. We also want to acknowledge and honor Black labor. Many parts of the United States were built by enslaved Africans and their enslaved descendants, and only within the past generation were Black people afforded full rights. Today, Black individuals and people of color disproportionately work as service staff across the country. This community is largely responsible for the maintenance of our daily lives, the food and food service available, childcare, healthcare, and many other basic necessities that make our lives easy. And with those acknowledgements, I would like to turn this over to my colleague, Dr. Allison De Marco.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. It is wonderful to have you with us today. I wanted to, again, I'm Allison De Marco. I'm a research associate at UNC and with the Jordan Institute for Families, and lucky enough to work with Sarah and Rakaya and to know Alex Rose, an amazing and delightful graduate of our MSW program. I wanted to start us off a little bit by sharing kind of the inspiration for this session today. For folks not familiar with the history of Durham, North Carolina, the story of Ann Atwater and CP Ellis is one that is very inspiring about folks that came together from very different perspectives to work together to improve conditions for all children in the Durham public schools. So I wanted to share some of Ann's own words, and then I'm also just going to share a little video about them because this story is so famous. There is a play and there's actually a movie that came out a couple years ago. So just to give us a little inspiration and framing about kind of working across lines of difference.
And he was cussing and calling. We have black kids going to Tim school. Oh, come on. They got them from somewhere.
Oh, the Supreme Court ruled segregated schools unconstitutional in 1954. It took until 1971 Durham, North Carolina to integrate theirs, thanks to what might be the unlikeliest of pairs. Black woman and a white supremacist. That's the premise of the new movie, The Best of Enemies.
He was upset and I was upset. And he was cussing and calling all black folks, and I was calling all white folks. And I couldn't stand white folks anyway. The children talked to us and got us together saying that they wanted to go to school with each other. And then we looked at each other like fools. We've been arguing about the wrong thing.
She was bold and clearly never minced words. Activist and Atwater herself, recalling a moment when she and CP Ellis took a good look at themselves and turned things around for the greater good. And much to their and everyone else's surprise, formed a friendship.
This here does the talking for me.
Starring Taraji P. Henson as Atwater
Have you read it?
Of course I read it.
and Sam Rockwell as Ellis, the film explores how their relationship evolved through being forced to work together.
CP Ellis, he acted like he was the meanest man in the world. And I wanted to cut his head off.
She can upset the world with her mouth if she wants to.
She went up against a lot of men who had a lot of power, like CP Ellis,
I'm the president of the Klan.
and she did not back down.
What we talking about is important. And you gon' damn well listen to us.
She was a hero.
Now you listen to me, Councilman, and you too, Mr. Tucker.
At the time, Ann was working as a community organizer. CP was the exalted grand cyclops of the KKK. The integration spawned much uproar.
We're trying to understand each other for once.
In order to manage it, mediator Bill Riddick called a charrette, or a series of meetings, appointing both Ann and CP in charge.
And they said I sold out because I worked with a Klansman. And he changed from a Klansman to a Christian. And they said I had sold out, said he was a lover. And we was chosen to be co-chairs to integrate the school system peacefully.
This story intrigued author Osha Gray Davidson, who wrote The Best of Enemies, Race and Redemption in the New South back in 1991, which inspired this movie.
It's getting the Hollywood bump, and which is great. I mean, I wrote this book 20 some years ago.
He got to witness both Ann and CP's dynamic firsthand.
I spent a few years doing research, going down to Durham for a couple weeks at a time and interviewing Ann and CP, their families, and other historical figures, and going to archives because we didn't have the internet back then.
The experience made him question how he saw race.
We gonna beat school segregation once and for all.
When people say, white people say, I don't have a racist bone in my body, it's like, did they get deboned or something? Because otherwise, you grew up in a white supremacist society. And it's just a fact that you're going to have biases and prejudices like I do. And the thing is to work on that, to acknowledge it, and then like CP, to overcome that.
In turn, it widened Osha's scope.
You know, we have this myth of a classless society and democracy for all, no racism. And then there's the uncomfortable truth of our problematic history. So it was the intersection of race, class, and gender that allowed this story to come together and to explore those issues. And sadly, those issues are just as relevant today and still need to be worked on.
And even if he didn't know, Ann told him.
She pointed out something that I was just seeing in terms of probably class. And she said, you're forgetting that Black people don't have that luxury. And I realized that I still have a whole lot to learn, and I still do today, but the journey is worth it.
Nearly 50 years later, some of those same prejudices both Ann and CP battled and overcame still plague society today.
The fight continues. If we think that it's timeless, that kind of means that we've given up hope. And if people give up hope, then they won't struggle, they won't fight. It's time for all Americans, specifically white Americans, to join this battle, to make America live up to its promise and confront white privilege, our own racism.
Because of the whole experience, CP left the Klan and never returned, despite threats to his life. He converted to Christianity and even began to champion civil rights. CP died in 2005. Ann continued her work, spending the last 12 years of her life teaching at North Carolina's School for Conversion, mentoring the next generation of young activists. She passed away in 2016. The school's Ann Atwater Freedom Library makes sure her legacy and teachings continue.
God gave me, number one, the gift to reach out and touch. And when I feel that somebody called me for some help, God wants me to go on record as saying, I tried. All I had was God holding my back. He still got my back. And he always will have it, as long as I keep trusting in him.
My hope for this movie is that people come away realizing that if these two could work together to end white supremacy and class oppression, then we damn well better be able to do it.
It's just what I do, CP. You know that. That's just what I do.
InsideEdition.com.
Well, I really appreciate that kind of ending and launching us into this discussion. And I had the great fortune of being in a Racial Equity Institute workshop with Ann Atwater shortly before she left us in 2016. So yeah, and with that, I want to bring Alex in, and she is going to really share some of the very engaging and important work she's been doing in our world. So before she gets started, I just wanted to tell you all a little bit about her. So Alex is a social worker from Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, and a Rotary Peace Fellow. She has worked across the Pacific, Asia, the United Kingdom, and the US, supporting communities affected by war, displacement, and violence, and strengthening the capacity of practitioners who work alongside them. As visiting lecturer in conflict transformation at the University of North Carolina, Alex teaches and speaks on healing, connection, and systems change, drawing on expertise in critical and liberation psychologies, as well as a decade of field experience in trauma healing, violence prevention, and humanitarian response. And Alex, thank you so, so much for being with us and sharing all this really important work that you do in our world.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Rakia, for hosting me. It's lovely to be here. I love the opportunity to talk about my work. I love the opportunity to talk about peace building, but I especially love those things when I get to do them in a place that has been so integral and fundamental to my own learning journey. And so being back under the umbrella of the School of Social Work feels really special. And I love the work of the Jordan Institute of Family. So big and special thank you to you all for hosting me. I can see some familiar names in the attendees, so lovely to see you all here. And I know that, Allison, you're not the only one that's had the chance to meet Ann Atwater in person as well. A couple of colleagues reached out to let me know that they'd also had this incredible and fortunate experience. So we're really lucky that she left a legacy here for us in North Carolina to explore and to learn from and to generate new ideas from. So I'm going to start just by sharing my screen here. And really, before I get into any of my content, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the context of this particular moment. There is so much happening in the world around us. And I think that perhaps now, maybe more so than ever before, the idea of coming into direct contact with radically different viewpoints, political perspectives, colleagues, family members, ethical stances, policy approaches, it probably feels more real and more present and perhaps even more threatening than what it ever has before. And, you know, it doesn't just feel this way because we have a lot of data and information that tells us that, at least here in the US, for example, polarization is not just felt and experienced, but the data tells us that it correlates to what's happening on the ground too. So that famous Gallup poll from the end of 2024 revealed that 80% of US adults believe that the country is really divided on the most important values, and only 18% believe that the country is strongly united around what matters most. So it's felt and experienced, and some of that is backed up in what we can see and read in data and information as well. And so I want us to be able to hold all of that really close as we explore these ideas, things that are happening really close to home, as well as things that are happening really far away in the world. And I want us to hold these ideas close as we explore what it looks like to come into contact with difference and respond to that difference in a way that is transformative rather than destructive. And we've got this incredibly high bar set for us by CP Ellis and Anne Atwater. So, but it's one that I think that we can actually live into and grow into and learn and grow to embody over time. So it means something to be talking about this topic in this time and this place. All right. Let me just kind of start briefly by introducing myself. You would have heard I have an accent, there's no surprises there. I'm from Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, but I've been in the US for about 3 years now. And I'm a social worker and a Rotary Peace Fellow. And most people are unfamiliar with the Rotary Peace Fellowship, but this is a scholarship that's awarded to up to 50 mid-career professionals every year from about 50 different countries. And they come to study in one of 5 international peace centers across the world. So the Peace Center in the US is actually co-hosted by Duke University and the University of North Carolina. And I came to study here as a fellow in 2022. I was born on Aboriginal Wiradjuri land in Australia and grew up on Aboriginal country on the east coast of Australia, but I'm a white person from Australia. And at the moment, I work as the visiting lecturer in the Department of Global Studies at the University of North Carolina, where I teach a course on the theory and practice of conflict transformation. Now, this course is part of the International Graduate Certificate in Peace and Conflict Resolution, but it's open to anyone, any graduate student from either of those universities. And I want to kind of locate some of my thinking and my ideas here amongst a lineage of other thinkers and community builders and peace builders who've done a lot of existing incredible work on these topics. And so much of what I want to talk to you about today is not new. These practices and principles are tried and tested and developed and innovated and iterated over centuries. Some of this comes from ancient and Indigenous knowledge and wisdom. But I locate my connection to these ideas in the writing and in the thinking of a number of interdisciplinary practitioners, therapists and community builders, peace builders. And I'll touch explicitly on some of those ideas in this webinar as we move through. But for now, kind of a lot of my thinking on this topic coalesces around these 5 books below, which we'll talk a little bit more about. Okay, so I mentioned that I was a Rotary Peace Fellow myself. This is a picture of my cohort and I. We were all really united by our commitment to peace and by our professional work experience, but we also had a lot of differences. Ironically enough, we usually always matched whenever we were in photos, which is such an unusual thing because we really had such incredibly different and diverse world perspectives. Let me give you an example. So my colleague Jorge on the left of your screen there was a peace builder serving 20 years on the front lines of the Chilean army as an army captain, using the use of force in order to achieve peace and non-violence, whereas many of us were deeply rooted in non-violent activist movements. These colleagues and I had really different views on the role of gender in peace building. We ate different food, we had very different religions, we had different beliefs on the capacity of the state to provide services. We had different views on the reliability of governments. We had different views on family. And I'm introducing you to these people here in this slide because I want to ground us in an understanding of difference that can show up in really, really broad ways. And I think that here in the US, there's a tendency to associate difference with politics and the spectrum of political ideas. And we often think of someone who's really different to us as someone who sits on the far end of the political spectrum. But when we do work in international or cross-cultural settings, or we take a bit less of a US-centric approach to thinking about difference, we have a much more expansive view of what that difference might entail. So when I'm talking about difference today, I'm talking about gender, I'm talking about culture, I'm talking about ethnicity, I'm talking about racial group, I'm talking about religion, I'm talking about sexuality, food preferences, you name it, all of those things in between, as well as political differences. Right, so absolute non-news flash of the year. But if we don't know or like or trust the people that we're working with, or we're afraid of them, it's really hard to get anything productive done. And this is not new information to most of you, right? And so when we come into contact with difference, most of us usually have a couple of default or habitual ways that we respond to that. And that usually looks like wanting to pretend that difference is not there, or minimizing it and turning the other way, banishing it. People that are different to us, we want to imagine that it's not there, we want to exile it, we want to label this group of people that thinks really differently with all of these particular traits, turn our back and then walk away into the cocoon of safety that we associate with people that share our own views and ideas. Well, the jury is not out on this one. We can't shame anyone into transformation. And so that approach of turning around and going back into our cocoon of emotional safety actually doesn't work. It's one that's been tried and tested, and it's part of the reason why we're in increasingly polarized societies, right? So if weeding out all of these different opinions that we don't like is not the way, the alternative is to find some kind of connection within this difference. And that looks like building relationships and relationality. And so building relationships, connection, and relationality is actually a really key component to working across difference, one that I'm going to highlight with a couple of examples today. And different frameworks use different words to describe talking about difference. Social work speaks a lot about cultural humility. Often international NGOs like the UN use words like intercultural competence. We can think of the work of Adrienne Maree Brown in terms of adapting and strategy. She calls that emergent strategy. But today I want to kind of locate my own thinking and ideas within the discipline of peace building. And peace building is going to be our entry point today for thinking about working across difference. And I'm going to give you two examples. I'm going to give you an example of working across difference at the practitioner level and some strategies that come about as a result of that. And then I'm going to give you an example from international fieldwork in Nauru about working across difference at a program level. So we'll try and capture some of these ideas across different ways that we interact with our colleagues, with our communities, with our teams, with the people that we serve. But before getting into that, I think it's helpful to connect us with a why. And the why to working across difference can come in all sorts of sizes, shapes, and forms, right? We might say it helps us deliver better service. Some people might say there's an economic argument for working across difference. There is an argument for the reduction of violence working across difference. But I really love this explanation, very zoomed out view by Adrienne Maree Brown, who says, we won't end the systemic patterns of harm by isolating and picking off individuals, just as we can't limit the communicative power of mycelium by plucking a single mushroom from the dirt. We need to flood the entire system with life-affirming practices and principles. So to me, working across difference is a life-affirming practice and principle, one that supports all people to flourish. And that's the reason why it feels really meaningful to me. So let's have a little think about this concept of peace building and how it relates to working across difference. It might not be a surprise to you all to know that it's actually really hard to land on a definition of peace. And when we bring practitioners together, particularly diverse practitioners, people usually always come up with very disparate and very diverse definitions of what they define peace to be. And that's actually a really good thing, because varied and culturally specific and personal definitions are by far the most important. We actually need to feel connected to our own definition of peace in order to be able to see and envision and bring about some of that peace for the communities that we serve. But the problem then is that, well, everything is peace, right? So this concept of intellectual concreteness helps us know a little bit more about what we're working with when we think of peace and peace building. And so Johann Galtung is often considered to be one of the fathers of modern day peace and conflict studies. And he gives us this concept that there are two ways of defining peace, and it depends on the amount and the type of violence present. So we can think of positive peace and negative peace. Negative peace is the absence of direct violence. And when we use this example, we might think of somewhere like the demilitarized zone in between North and South Korea as one of the most peaceful places on earth, right? There is so much military presence that active warfare is basically impossible. There's a deterrent effect which reduces the amount of direct violence. It's also the kind of peace that was being spoken about in Alabama in 1956. Now, some of you might be super familiar with this story. It comes about nearly 20 years before the work of Anne Atwater. But in 1956, when Autherine Lucy, who was the first Black student to attend the University of Alabama, started going to classes, the university erupted into protest against her presence on campus. There were protests, there was damaging of buildings, the president of the university's house was firebombed, and this kind of violence erupted as a result of her attending classes. So in response to this violence on campus, the university actually decided to suspend Autherine Lucy and then went on to expel her from the University of Alabama. The next day after this decision, the newspaper headlines from Alabama said, "There is peace on the campus of the University of Alabama." Now, of course, the direct violence had stopped, but peace for who? And so this is what we might think of as negative peace. It's the absence of direct conflict or violence, but it doesn't necessarily tell us anything about the structures of equity or equality that underlie it. So then the opposite of that is positive peace. And this is a quality that's brought about in terms of a reduction of direct or indirect violence. So we can think of this as a peace that is also just, brings about some level of justice or has an orientation towards dignity as well, where some of the conditions that lead to violence have been transformed. And there's, of course, that incredibly famous quote by Dr. King that says, "Peace is not merely the absence of tension, but the presence of justice." And we could think of lots of programs and services that do this, right? I mean, whether or not they're using the language of peace building, it doesn't really matter. It's about transforming some of those structural issues that lead to violence affecting individuals and communities. So I've included just one straightforward example here that I know about from my own country, which is the Yiddiman program, which runs bush camps on country to strengthen cultural identity. And this is for those that are at risk of using violence or having violence used against them. And so rather than stopping the violence when it's happening, these programs are seeking to transform some of the conditions before violence erupts as a strategy for people to use and rely on. And so when we think of peace building, really we're talking about parallel processes, right? It's not either positive peace or negative peace. It's both of these processes unfolding in parallel relationship at the same time. So peace building prevents, reduces, transforms, and helps people recover from violence in all forms, while at the same time empowering people to foster relationships at all levels that create structural justice. So we're talking about these parallel and complementary processes. And because of that, they're relational. Not only are the processes themselves in relationship to each other, when we zoom all the way in, what we're actually talking about is transforming the relationships between people on a really, really micro level. And then we can scale up and scale out over time. So we start with really little things like developing spaces for dialogue, and we go all the way up and all the way out to things like National Truth and Reconciliation Commissions. And all the things that happen in between on that spectrum fall under the remit of peace building. It's relational, and therefore involves a lot of working across difference. So let me give you a little example of what I mean here. And I want to talk about peace building at the practitioner level. And here on this slide, as I was thinking about preparing for this webinar, I was kind of thinking, what are the qualities that we seek to teach in our curriculum in international peace and conflict transformation? What are the qualities that we look for when we select Rotary Peace Fellows? What are the qualities that we look for in students and practitioners in the classroom? And also, what are the qualities that I've experienced among really high-functioning teams that work a lot across difference? And I'm sure this is not an exhaustive list, right? I'm not going to read each of them out, but ultimately, when I think about it, I think practitioners who work really well across difference are self-aware. They are attuned, they have a sense of courage, they have tolerance, and they're committed to expanding and building that tolerance, and they use particular communication tools to demonstrate all of these things. So up in the self-awareness category, I want you to have a look here. There's this one, the third dot point is have awareness of their own habitual responses to difference in order to act with intention. So what I want to do is tell you a little bit about how we teach this in the classroom. So I'm going to talk about a class assignment that I set for these practitioners, but there's no reason why you can't try this yourself as an individual or as a team building exercise. There are lots of ways that you might adapt this to learn a little bit more about your own habitual responses to difference. So in the assignment, practitioners were asked to engage with a perspective that strongly challenged their beliefs, values, or worldview by listening to or watching content they deeply disagree with for 20 minutes. Now, there were parameters on this, right? Do not watch direct violence. Do not watch people harming each other. Do not watch something that is going to be so deeply distressing to you that you're not going to be able to return to some kind of sense of regulation. And I gave a whole list of places where people might start. So for people that identify as politically left, we would encourage them to watch Fox News, for example. For people that identify as politically right, we might encourage them to watch MSNBC or something to the left. For religious perspectives, we would give a range of positions that people might take and then positions that are counter to that. And so while they were engaging with this content, I asked them to track their emotional, physical, and cognitive responses, noticing how their body and mind responded to the moment. So let's remember, these practitioners are globally experienced, diverse, people that have been selected through an incredibly rigorous selection process and are known for their work in peace and development. Here's what they experienced. So each of those dots on the emotions wheel represents an emotion that someone identified, in addition to the emotions that are listed on the left-hand side, right? So the ones listed on the left-hand side are not in the emotions wheel. And so you can kind of see pretty quickly that like this was activating for people. Most people experience anger when they are listening to, remember, this is not necessarily an active conversation, right? They're just listening to it. People feel frustrated. Some people feel disgusted, worried, anxious, hopeless, disappointed, resentful, scared. And then on the left-hand side, defensive, invalidated, furious, infuriated, all of those things, right? So we're listening to something that is different to our own opinions, and this is what it brings up. So brave, these people, they had many impulses. And by they, I also include myself in here too, right? It's a co-learning community. Impulses were to smash something, to throw something at the computer, just to stop listening and walk away, to counter the arguments that were being made, to yell at them, to build an arsenal of words against them, or to look down on them, to judge them, to dismiss them. And they also spoke about the signs of activation that they experienced in their own bodies. So here, headache, chest tightness, eye rolling, body was tense, contorted expressions in my face, a heaviness on my chest, pressure around the frontal lobe. There's a pretty wide range of physiological sensations in response to listening to ideas and opinions that are really different to our own. And here's the point here, like when this level of activation is present, it's really hard to see the nuance. It's really hard to listen, and we usually struggle to take in meaning and understanding at this particular point. Or many of us just withdraw. So the point is, if you're one of those people that's sitting at the dinner table and your uncle says something weird and you roll your eyes, or if you want to like reach across the TV screen and like shake the person that you're listening to because you disagree with them so much, or if you like walk away when someone says something really inflammatory, welcome to the club. Like this is really hard. And these experiences are actually really normal. In many ways, we're physiologically responsive to what happens when we're presented with something that is really different to us. These are habituated ways of responding. And no doubt this was happening for Anne Atwater as she is engaging with CP Ellis and vice versa, right? So when we think about Anne Atwater and CP Ellis, we don't put them in some kind of magical category where they're immune to all of the challenges of working across difference and then they just do it. They're actually just like any one of us, and that level of working across difference is attainable for all of us, and it kind of starts with recognizing some of what happens in our bodies when we're in contact with difference. So the point here is really bringing awareness to some of these processes and clocking them in real time, returning to our window of tolerance is a really powerful strategy for working across difference. So working across difference can bring up fear, discomfort, uncertainty, and many more, particularly if we experience that difference as threatening. It's natural to want to avoid those feelings. We are hardwired, we're programmed for comfort. So really natural to want to turn away from that experience. But becoming aware of our moment-to-moment experiences and increasing our capacity to tolerate them helps us to engage with difference more intentionally and less habitually. And then staying inside our window of tolerance by turning down our fight, flight, freeze response is a powerful strategy for creating the interpersonal conditions to proactively work across difference. And finally, which is like so this is kind of the meat of this whole idea, right? Is that when interaction and communication is rooted in intentionally calm and clear interactions, repeated with others over time, working across difference is likely to be much more effective. So if you're a social worker in the audience or a psychologist or a peer worker or a peer support worker, you will have seen this graphic many times. You've probably explained it to lots of people. If you're seeing this for the first time, this is called the window of tolerance. And it's a graphic that helps us understand why and how emotions play a big role in determining the outcome of particular situations. So it helps us understand optimal levels of arousal without getting overwhelmed. So right now, if you're in your home, you might be watching the screen, you might be in a place that feels comfortable, you're probably, hopefully, calm, engaged, alert. Your response to the stimulus is within your window of tolerance. But many things can push us either above into the parasympathetic nervous system, or below into the parasympathetic nervous system, or above into the sympathetic nervous system. So we can easily become above hyper-aroused, which is often associated with fight or flight, or hypo-aroused, which is often associated with the freeze response. So when thinking about different parts of the window of tolerance are usually correlated with different outcomes. If we are working across difference and we are starting to become dysregulated, we're moving up into hyperarousal, the tension that might be experienced as a result of that difference is likely to escalate. If, as we're working across difference, we start to feel withdrawn, shut down, and turning away, we're usually going to avoid the tension of working across difference, but not avoid in a good way, right? Avoid as in suppress, avoid as in split off, avoid as in exile. And these things are also equally unhelpful when building relationships. If we can manage to stay within that window of tolerance, present, calm, engaged, alert, thinking clearly, usually we transform the tension that might be present there when working across difference. And this builds trust, it builds relationality, it fosters connection, ultimately leading to like the kinds of outcomes that many of us that work in social justice spaces like, long and desire to achieve with others. So what do we do when we're going up, when we're going down? Well, I asked the people in the class, these incredible practitioners, what is it that you would need to hear when you're either up there or down there in order to return to the window of tolerance? And they came up with some incredible ideas. Engaging in disagreement does not mean my thoughts and beliefs are under attack. I would tell myself to breathe, to know that I'm safe. I would also remind myself that I'm a survivor. And even though this is hard, this too shall pass. I have every tool I need to keep marching on. This may sound extreme and hurtful, but it's just an opinion. Understanding another perspective does not mean compromising my values. I'm not alone. And so these are ways that practitioners, but any of us, you and I can use these all the time, are reminding themselves that a disagreement does not need to be threatening to our own sense of self. Having different ideas and opinions does not mean that we are under attack or that ours aren't also really valid. And instead, we're kind of normalizing this idea that people have different ideas about so many important things in the world, and that's okay. So thinking about some of those initial competencies of practitioners that work well across difference, tolerating ambiguity, high tolerance for uncertainty, a dialectical worldview, right? Being able to see this, but also see this at the same time. So some of these statements are tapping into those competencies. And what was Anne Atwater saying to herself, right, as she is engaging with CP Ellis? Maybe she's saying, I can do hard things. Maybe she's saying it's okay to feel this way. Remember, these are not people in some kind of special magical category that are so different to us, right? These are people from the community that were doing incredible work across difference, but they probably didn't start at this level. These are skills that they were building up and building across over time. So the point kind of to wrap up this example on the practitioner level is it's often our unhealed wounds that prevent us from being able to breathe, to take in new information, to see nuance, and to humanize the other party. And this is really, we might call this a trauma-informed approach, right? Sometimes it's our previous experiences of disagreement, it's our previous experiences of not being treated equally that get in the way or constrict the possibilities that we imagine are available to us in the moment of a difficult conversation. But from a grounded, regulated place, we have much more access to identify nuance, to experience empathy, and recognize multiple truths. And all of these are key capacities for working across difference. And when we do that, it invites connection, trust, and understanding, even if there's disagreement. Working across difference is not about finding agreement, it's about finding understanding. And working across difference is transformative when it's rooted in intentionally calm and clear interactions repeated with others over time. All right, so I'm going to move us on to the second example here, which is working across difference at a program level. And to do that, I want to introduce you to a 90-second clip. And the context that I want to give, I'm not going to give you context. I'll give you the 90-second clip and then I'll give you the context afterwards. So let me just share here. Okay, 1 second. Okay.
Welcome to sunny Nauru, described as an open-air prison by the refugees and asylum seekers detained here. This tiny Pacific Islands population is around 11,300 people, But hundreds more refugees and asylum seekers also live here, where they're trapped indefinitely and where life is increasingly desperate. Why are they here? Thank Australia. Since 2013, Australia's offshore processing policy has mandated that people seeking safety in Australia by boat be processed outside the country. Australia pays Nauru to host these individuals, couples, and families. But after years confined to this tiny island, hope of a free future is running thin, and mental health is deteriorating fast. For 11 months, MSF provided mental health care on Nauru. We served local Nauruans, as well as 208 refugees and asylum seekers. And among these 208 men, women, and children, 63 attempted suicide. 124 expressed suicidal ideation, and 34 committed acts of self-harm. These patients told us that life felt meaningless, that they had fled one terrible situation only to wind up in a nightmare. When Nauru abruptly expelled MSF in October 2018, we left behind patients in a desperate situation. For the refugees and asylum seekers we left behind, our mental health services were vital. But as long as these people remain trapped on Nauru, even our services were not a solution. That's why we're asking you to join MSF in calling for the
Okay, now I just want to show you Nauru. So can you all see Google Maps? Yeah, okay. Just watch this. So Nauru is where I worked for 2 years, a little bit before coming to the US. I'm just going to zoom out here so you can start to get a sense of where this country is. So it is remote. It is one of the most remote parts of the entire world. Let me come back to my slides here. Okay. So this is the entire country of Nauru. This is me flying into it. I worked on Nauru for 2 years between 2016 and 2018. It's a really tiny island. You can walk around the whole island. It's the 3rd smallest country in the world, smack bang in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And a little bit of context, some of which you heard in the video, right? So there is 2005, at the time, this is no longer accurate, but at the time that I was there was 2,500 refugees and asylum seekers on Nauru. These were people from Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Rakhine State, Sudan, Myanmar, Somalia, and many stateless peoples. The population of Nauru, of Nauruans, was between 10 and 12,000 people. A long time before this experience, in the 1990s and early 2000s, Nauru was one of the richest countries per capita in the world. That's a whole other story for another time. It is now one of the poorest countries in the world per capita. And at the time that I was there were increasing tensions between different refugee and asylum seeker groups and Nauruan locals. And these tensions were starting to boil over, violence was starting to escalate, and there were what we call a number of significant and serious flashpoints of violence happening in the community. Why? What was happening here was rooted in difference. So, you heard in the video that many asylum seekers and refugees described Nauru as an open air prison, but Nauruans are extremely proud people. They have an incredible history and lineage of survival and resilience and incredible knowledge of being so remote and what it has taken for these people to adapt and respond to their environments over millions of years. There was significant difference between housing that was available to refugees and asylum seekers and what was available to Nauruans. Nauruans lived on the left, and refugees and asylum seekers usually had new houses built for them by the Australian government, which of course everyone should be entitled to, right? The idea here is not to make it worse for refugees and asylum seekers, but the idea here is that there were significant differences in what people were experiencing for their home life. This is crazy to me. I mean, the national food of Nauru is pork. There are Pigs everywhere. Everyone is growing pigs. Everyone is eating pigs all the time. People are slaughtering pigs everywhere. Look left, right, and center. And most of the refugees and asylum seekers are Muslim. They are practicing a religion that actively does not eat this kind of meat or does not surround themselves with it, does not participate in the slaughter and killing of this animal. And so on a minutia level, these differences start to really pile up, right? And these are all things that were kind of just overlooked when initially planning for long-term resettlement for these refugees and asylum seekers. And then this kind of comes back to the housing point too, right? So there was a lot of services and support, international NGOs on the ground for the refugees and asylum seekers. But the services available for Nauruans were very old, very dysfunctional, incredibly underfunded and under-resourced, and pile on to that lots and lots of historical challenges around receiving aid from external countries, including Australia. And then finally, Nauruans, like the total population of Nauru that was a refugee or asylum seeker was close to 35%, so around 3,500 people of 10,000. But the number of refugees or asylum seekers represented in government, policy, police, or law enforcement was 0. So we're creating these huge discrepancies, right? And what was starting to happen at this time was that tension was starting to occur between Nauruans and refugees and asylum seekers, but tension was also starting to occur between the different groups of asylum seekers themselves. So, and I mentioned before a number of flashpoints or early warning signs in terms of violence erupting or conflict starting to become more and more unmanageable, moving beyond crime to overt violence that might be divided around racial or ethnic or citizenship lines. So the situation was pretty serious, but there were also some protective factors. So, for example, people really wanted to be able to live together. Remembering that this was a tiny island, you saw the photos, there's nowhere else to go. And there were some informal conflict resolutions already in place, particularly around the role of grandmothers and the work of a matrilineal processes around talk and dialogue. There was a genuine and deep desire to experience peace and stability after experiencing displacement and war. And there was a wide cross-cultural appreciation for religion and religious leaders. So nearly everyone on the island was affiliated with a practiced religion. Like, you name it, that religion was there and it was practiced by a group of people. So this is not homogenous. We didn't actually need people to all be practicing the same religion in order to appreciate the role that religion and spirituality had in the lives of different people and their different community members, even though the religion wasn't the same. So what did we do? We developed a peace building intervention, which had a number of different aims. So these aims were to develop spaces for dialogue, aimed at better understanding each other. Like I mentioned before, not working towards agreement here, we're working towards understanding. A really key component of working across difference is letting go of this desire to find agreement and find consensus. And actually, sometimes that comes, but it comes through understanding. So we're working towards that first. We wanted people to be able to acknowledge and see each other and strengthen community ties through shared engagement. We wanted to develop informal spaces for breaking down walls and supporting a shared responsibility for peace. And we wanted to upskill the community to respond generatively to conflict and to difference. And so we did a couple of interesting things. We noticed that while people had a number of barriers in terms of where they lived and language barriers, people would tend to congregate in their own cultural and community groups. A lot of people had school-aged children, and they were dropping these school-aged children off at the one school on the whole island at the same time every morning. So we started a number of separate dialogues where we kept community groups according to their own community group initially, and we started to engage in a process of asset mapping. So we would work with the individual community groups to understand more about the assets and the strengths and the skills that they have as a community group. And we would work with the parents around this initially. And as time went on, we built an asset map of the different community groups on Nauru. And then once we had that asset map, the goal was to leverage those assets to map it onto particular community needs. And in the second phase is where we brought the different community groups together to kind of be in dialogue, not focused on the difference yet, but focused on the strength of that particular community. So this is one of the early results that came about as a result of this asset mapping project. And it led to a number of formal and informal outcomes. So in no way did this mean that all of the issues were solved. In no way did this mean that all of a sudden everyone went from not liking each other to finding everyone amazing. Not at all. But what it did do was start to increase the surface area in which there was cross-cultural collaboration and communication. So one example that we used was the Lebanese community. Lebanon is a country close to the beach and close to the water. And so the Lebanese community had really strong swimming skills. And so a number of Lebanese community members were embedded into the Nauruan surf lifesaving team. Nauru is a country surrounded by oceans. And so this was kind of one way of using those particular skills. We also, you can probably see on this asset map that there are a number of skills and services that relate to the supply chain for food. So we would have a Pakistani restaurant that would prepare large catering for different meals, perhaps for the Nauruan government or perhaps for a big family event. But the supply chain would go back all the way through the Iraqi community, which loved to teach about culinary skills. The vegetables would come from the Burmese community who had been preparing and growing those particular vegetables. The fish would come from Nauruans. And so what we were working towards was informal spaces where some of these walls would start to be broken down a little bit. And there were a number of other projects that came out of that, including computer lessons and sports lessons. And once we had that, we kind of worked on creating some more of these spaces for people to be in contact and in community with each other. Overall, the project was really successful, and we were able to develop lots of other projects as a result of this asset mapping and then mapping those assets onto needs in the community. So to kind of summarize those two examples, right, at the practitioner level, practitioners that work best across difference show self-awareness. They're attuned to that difference. They don't try and minimize it or pretend that it's not there. They engage with tension, nuance, and complexity with courage. They tolerate uncertainty and multiple truths. They communicate non-violently, and they listen to understand. And programs that really successfully work across difference create space for dialogue about difference. They build trust and alignment over time. They leverage community strengths. They pay attention to both formal and informal processes, and they promote understanding rather than agreement. We let go of this idea that we have to get everyone on the exact same page. Usually, once we let that go and we work towards understanding, all of a sudden people tend to be more on the same page than what they initially thought. So where do we kind of start with this? It's a little bit like exercise, right? Like I am really into the Tour de France, which is a 21-day cycling race across France. And but I don't start being into cycling by signing up for the Tour de France, right? Like I actually become interested in that through like riding for 10 minutes a day. And when we think about these practices and strategies, really it's not that different. Like we have to start at a place that feels attainable and achievable and measured against our own strengths and skills. So don't start with the most difficult conversations or people. Like that's usually a really challenging place to find ourselves in. And we're kind of in the business of growing our capacity. And we grow our capacity through growing our confidence and growing our tolerance. So when we start somewhere that's like way too hard, like we're trying to convince someone with a really closed mind, it's not going to be a good way for us to build our tolerance or our confidence. But pay attention to this concept of the window of tolerance, right? You might be really curious. Are you someone that usually goes all the way up, or are you someone that usually goes all the way down? And most of us have somewhere that we usually end up. And then we can think about particular strategies for coming back into the window of tolerance based on where we usually end up in when we're experiencing a stimulus that feels threatening. Yeah, try the assignment. Watch something for 20 minutes and see what happens. Maybe 20 minutes is a long amount of time. Do it for 10 minutes and see what you notice or what you experience, and try it with your team too. How do you respond differently to different stimulus? Is there someone who's a little bit further along in the journey that might have some good kind of skills and strategies to share? And foster dialogue spaces that enable seeing each other's humanity before launching into difficult conversations. And usually this is about understanding that the people that we might disagree with, or the people that look or sound or feel or whatever really different to us, are incredibly multidimensional people, as are we. So the dimension of disagreement is one. We might both really disagree on abortion care, for example, but I, just like the other person that I might disagree with, have so many other dimensions of our lives in which we can see and acknowledge each other's humanity. And the more that we can see and acknowledge of each other's humanity, the more empathy we tend to be able to tap into, the more connection we tend to be able to find. And this is a strategy that's often called win hearts and then minds. Like, we're actually wanting to connect with people, and that connection is so much more influential than just trying to argue against someone's particular point of view. And then even in moments when building peace is too much, just focus on avoiding war, right? Like, when you can't work across difference, avoid actively working against it. So that might look like taking some deep breaths and letting someone know that you want to continue the conversation at a later date, or rather than ending up in a screaming match and it's 10 minutes down the line and it's too late to ever go back now, right? Where is the most meaningful place where you can tap out to avoid escalation or withdrawal? It avoids deep part of building confidence too, knowing when to tap out and when to pursue a different approach at a later date. And also reach out. Like, these strategies are about coaching and training and building communities of practice and being in relationship with people that do this the same or do this differently to you too. So I'm always interested in hearing about the work that people are doing, either in their team, their organization, their group, their classroom. It's fabulous. And then finally, this is like the most amazing collection of things, and I could just talk all day about how all of these are so good, but this is a really good entry point. Kazu Haga's Healing Resistance is the required reading for the course that I teach, but we also read We Will Not Cancel Us by Adrienne Marie Brown. And then this episode of Super Communicators is an incredible case study which features Verna Myers, who was the former VP for Inclusion for Netflix. And she breaks down an incredibly difficult conflict that occurred in Netflix after, I think it was the CEO was dismissed after using a racial slur. And her job was to come in and figure out, what do we do now? And so she breaks it down in this wonderful case study. And then this is as if, like, the universe, I put a call out to the universe and they produced. Like, they released this podcast episode on Hidden Brain 2 days ago. It's called Win Hearts Then Minds. In full transparency, I haven't listened to all of it, but listen to the first half and it's great. But the point is that a lot of people are starting to be interested in talking about this and sharing some of the ways that they do. And then the Other and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley is a really good place to go for resources and both intellectual and practice space in terms of what does it mean to belong without needing to other people. So that's it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Please feel free to reach out, contact me via email. Yeah, thank you all so much. I'm so happy to take questions or respond to people's thoughts or ideas.
Thanks, Alex. Oh my goodness, that was amazing. I know I have lots of thoughts and questions and just gratitude for all that you shared. We're a small enough group that if folks want to raise their hand and ask their questions out loud, we can absolutely do that. And I might just get started because one of the things I was really interested in was the asset mapping process that you all did, and curious like how that actually works.
So it looked like a really chaotic, messy community building moment of flying post-it notes, big rolls of butcher's paper on walls, and having communities start really broad and then narrowing down over time, over a number of different sessions. What is the one skill that we would be most proud to offer to our community members in this particular context? So it's not that every Lebanese community member was an amazing swimmer and that's how they wanted to be known forever and ever and ever. But these sessions weren't happening in a vacuum, right? They were happening with the goal of getting people towards one skill or capacity that they could offer as a peace building process to break down barriers. And we also needed to have them be different from each other. So there's also some coaching and guiding in terms of lots of communities were incredibly good at growing their own gardens, but that was a skill that was covered by one particular community group. And so we kind of coached and encouraged people to think differently. And so some of the challenges around that were people not wanting to be defined by one particular skill or asset, the community groups themselves being really diverse, of course, engaging children too, like some of those skills were difficult for younger kids, for example. But ultimately, we were looking for like the lowest common denominator that would initiate the most sense of pride for the largest number of community members in that particular group. Mm-hmm. And this is built through trust too. So over time and 1,000 sticky notes and lots of interpreters and lots of amazing prepared food and cultural knowledge and indoors and outdoors, it doesn't usually look particularly clean or tidy or organized, these processes.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I also really love just looking at the wheel and then the examples you provided about how each community contributed something to the fuller community, and just beautiful, beautiful. How did you come to be there?
I had been working in refugee support and resettlement in Australia before that particular role. And my work, I was always interested in international work, and the positions that I was in were kind of subcontracted from the Australian government. So really they were looking for Australians to fill these positions. It was an really incredible 2 years of practice. Like I learned so much, I experienced so much. It is not a particularly forgiving environment for practitioners or for the people who are kind of exposed to the serious ethical dilemmas of a situation like this. Australia no longer uses offshore processing in this same way to process refugees and asylum seekers, but it doesn't mean that we don't continually think about some of the ways that these people were put in awful situations in order to access their human rights of claiming asylum.
Thanks, Alex. And one of the other things I appreciated from early on was kind of folks' mantras or self-talk ideas when they were doing that watching activity. Like, what are some things that you recommend for either getting, from here or down, or getting, back up?
Okay. Well, this is where I think trauma-informed approach is really helpful, right? Like that quote by Kazu Haga, like it's often our unhealed wounds that get in the way of seeing nuance. So I might have had in the past like some really difficult conversations with older men about gender, for example, and those conversations might find themselves getting in the way of future conversations that I'm trying to have with other people. And this is the dynamic way that the past interacts with the present. And it's very hard to separate out that was then and this is now. So a trauma-informed approach uses curiosity, uses time, uses regulation, staying connected and attached to yourself without tipping over into overwhelm. And then the ways that we achieve that sense of regulation or integration depend for each of us. Some people use body-based strategies like movement and yoga to stay like really within their window of tolerance. Other people on a micro level in a conversation might be just reminding themselves that the idea of danger, or the idea of difference is not dangerous right here in this moment, right? Or I always think about that story about the lion print. And so the story is like, if we think back to cave people times, there's these cave people and they're out hunting and they see a lion, and a lion attacks and eats one of the members of their group. Okay, so imprinted on the brain of these cave people, lion equals danger, equals death, equals bad. Avoid at all costs. And so time goes by, and then the next time they're out hunting and they hear a lion, lion equals danger, equals bad, equals death. So they hear the lion, they respond, they run away. Good. What about the next time they're out, they smell a lion? And they're like, smelling a lion equals danger, equals death. Okay, they run away. What about the next time they're out, they see a lion paw print? Now, this might not be a sign of imminent death, right? This might be a reminder of something that has previously caused harm, but we might need to assess, can I hear a lion? Do I smell a lion? Can I see a lion? Or is this just a lion paw print? And this is true in our conversations as well, right? We might be able to go through some of this process. Like, is this a lion paw print? This person disagreeing with me about my gender, or is this actually a lion? And this is a dangerous conversation. And this is one that I should not be in because I'm actually under threat. And there's a lot of nuance there, right? And there's a lot of practice and a lot of thinking. But sometimes what happens is that what we're seeing is a lion paw print, and we turn around and we run, or we fight. These are the fight, flight, freeze responses. So actively testing ourselves in a compassionate and kind and loving way helps us get a bit clearer. What is it that I'm seeing here? Like, how dangerous is this? A threat, or is this a reminder of a time where I felt threatened before?
Yeah. Alex, I hope you don't mind me bringing this up. When we were chatting before, you shared an example where you had a misstep. Yeah. And I wonder, I just wonder, like, we all do that. And then we tend to freeze or like, oh no, what do I do? And I wonder, like, what do you suggest in that case?
Yeah, I had a fabulous misstep in about week 10 of my teaching last semester. And, it's an example that I've come back to so many times, and I'm like just so grateful for the learning that has come out of it. I mean, a lot of shame could also come out of it, but actually, fortunately, a lot of learning has come out of it. So I won't go into too many details, but in class, I'm teaching a class on conflict transformation, right? And here I am teaching and teaching and teaching, and we've got so much to talk about. And lo and behold, what could possibly go wrong? But a conflict emerges in the classroom. Who would have thought? And I really mishandled it. I mean, it's kind of funny to think back on it now, but what happened in the moment is I'm watching what I thought of as a conflict occurring between two students in the classroom, and my role as a bystander moved really quickly to intervene. And that intervention caused some of its own harms. And that intervention started to have other repercussions for people that maybe experienced shame in the classroom, or maybe experienced being shut down in front of their peers, or maybe started to feel really judged or labeled for wanting to get more information. And so what did I do? I pretended it didn't happen, of course. And until the end of the class, and I mean, I knew pretty quickly, like that was not good. And so I thought a lot about it over the next few days. I contacted mentors, I debriefed with friends, and it didn't take me too long to land on what it actually was that had happened and the role that I'd played in kind of amplifying some of the harms that might have occurred in the classroom. So I met individually with both students. We had wonderful conversations, like really so grateful to them for their time. I heard about things from different perspectives. And then I really resisted the urge to sweep it under the rug in the next class. And we started by talking about it and people sharing their different experiences of being in a classroom about conflict transformation when the person facilitating that is so like inadequately responding to it. And that was because I'd processed enough of my own stuff by that point to be able to rock up and be like, okay, we should talk about this. What it led to was so generative in terms of the transformation, in terms of like the depth of connection that we were able to achieve as a class afterwards. And I really had to adapt and adjust my own definition of working across difference after that, or, of conflict transformation. Like working across difference is not getting it perfect the first time. Working across difference is not having all of the answers and then perfectly like executing it. Having, conflict transformation is actually way more messy than that. And it's still working across difference if you go back 1 week later and take accountability. It's still working across difference if you get it wrong 3 times and then you're like, oh, I think now I know what to do differently next time. And so whereas I had been kind of fixed that there's this formula and we do it and our emotions and we don't go into our window, blah, 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 blah. Well, not able to access any of that in the moment, but able to access that in the days and weeks afterwards, and bringing it back around and being able to be with it next time around is still working across difference. In fact, it might even be a more realistic version of what working across difference can look like for most of us. So thank you for the opportunity to share that.
Well, thank you for letting me do that. I really appreciate that. There's a question from John in the chat. He said, can you speak about working with multiple stakeholders when seeking to build peace in a program, e.g. refugees, INGOs, locals, other humanitarian workers, and how you balance different demands and expectations? Great question.
Yeah. It's a good question. Thank you, John, for the question. I think here that a really good starting point is that concept that we spoke about earlier, like not starting with wanting to get to agreement, starting with wanting to get to understanding. And these are listening practices fundamentally, right? It's like listening to understand rather than listening to respond. Usually in that listening process, we start to hear different dimensions of what this particular stakeholder might be trying to think through. We might even start to find some points of commonality. And then from there, what we're doing is touching into those points of commonality rather than wanting to get an agreement signed from everyone at the same time. Sometimes we actually need an agreement. Sometimes we need a memorandum of understanding. And so we have to kind of hang out in the space before that. In my experience, where this has failed sometimes is not giving us enough space to have the messy, confusing, overlapping different experiences before the memorandum of understanding. And so we're pushing too hard and too quickly to get to something that might need a little bit more time. And, when we think about NGOs and the kind of commodification and the NGO industrial complex, those processes are not often given a lot of credible time accounted for them. We tend to not be able to measure them in terms of KPIs. We tend to not be able to think of them into the KPI is the memorandum of understanding or the shared service agreement. It's not how well we were able to understand each other before that to arrive at this particular version of an agreement. And being responsive and dynamic, I think like some of those competencies there are around flexibility and responding to what's emerging. And I always think about responding to what's in the room rather than responding just to the agenda. And so when conflict or tension starts to emerge, perhaps in a meeting with multiple stakeholders, and we're trying to arrive at a shared services agreement, when we're too focused on our own agenda, we tend to lose the opportunity to tune in or to lean into some of what might be emerging in the room. And that's a little bit about, facilitation and being open and listening out for some of those nuanced, like micro interactions. But Irvin Yalom from a therapeutic background would say everything is grist for the mill, right? So that micro disagreement that these two stakeholders had is reflective of something larger underneath. And every room, there's a conversation in every room that only those people can have at that particular amount of time. So our job is to find what that unique conversation is and move from there.
Wonderful. Thanks for addressing that. I appreciate that too. One of the things I was curious about, and this is, I guess, a little more nuts and bolts, but I feel like sometimes I don't know what it's meant when we say communicating nonviolently.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh, well, there are so many good resources for that. Like this one, this is the one that I mentioned in the webinar, but nonviolent communication is commonly associated with the principles of Kingian nonviolence. So the philosophy and approach articulated by Dr. Martin Luther King. And these are 6 pillars and 6 ways of interacting with people. They are incredible tools for thinking about how do we respond in the face of violence? How do we enact violence? How do we not enact violence on ourselves and on our community members? But it's also things like really specific, like communication things. And a good example of communicating non-violently is like you're doing something that's really annoying is I'm feeling really annoyed in this moment. So there's like taking responsibility for some of the ways that we feel. It's using I statements. It's giving words to what might be emerging in the dynamic between us. But this is philosophy and approach designed and articulated by Dr. Martin Luther King that's been adapted for people in communities and practitioners all over. And I think in all the training and all the learning and all the thinking that I've done, there are lots of different concepts that help us communicate better. I can think of mental health first aid, emotional CPR, but I think Kingian nonviolence gives the broadest range of tools to the broadest number of people doing all different kinds of work. And it's rooted in a philosophy of love. Like these are the life-affirming principles and practices that Adrienne Marie Brown talks about when she speaks about flooding the system. And I think this is a really great place to start. We can think of Kingian nonviolence as a tool belt, and then we have things like dialogue as one of the tools, or apology as one of the tools, or forgiveness as one of the tools on the tool belt.
Alex, what's one thing that you might suggest folks as a first step to building some skills around this? Like what would go out and do this evening?
Okay, yeah. Go on a walk and listen to this episode of Super Communicators. And as you're listening, like you're listening to hear what resonates, what doesn't, but you're also listening to hear what parts of the story activate you. Whose side do you notice yourself taking?
Alex froze a bit. So while we're hoping she comes back in, I just want to note that
Frozen.
Okay. You're back.
Sorry.
You're back. You're back. So we're listening to the podcast as we're taking a walk and listening to what, like whose side we're taking, what's resonating.
Which parts of the story are you hooked by? Are you hooked by the injustice of the person losing their job? Are you hooked by the awful racial slur that they used? Are you hooked by the way that the company responded in the days after? So what is it about this process that is activating for you? And I'm just seeing someone's note in the chat, so yeah, I can share that. Let me perhaps go back to this slide so people can see it. And that is, yeah, there we go. So it's the super communicators one here. Us when working across difference, like which parts of that, like all knowledge is useful, right? So the more awareness that we have, the more agency that we tend to be able to experience and execute in a moment where we need to work across difference. Listening out for what it is about this example that gets you activated, and then where would you go from there?
I love that. Thank you. I also want to make sure you see some of the comments in the chat. Yeah, this is really worthwhile, a wonderful presentation, a lot to consider and apply. I really like that.
Good.
Yay! And one of our incoming MSW students said conversations like these are exactly what they're excited to hear about and be part of.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yay!
Me too. Me too. Yeah. So I just want to thank you for being here, for everyone else for being here, and to note, we'll be sharing out resources. So don't feel like you have to quickly write that all down, because we'll share all these great ideas and more things to dig into and engage with that Alex shared today, and a little evaluation. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, but just thank everyone for being here. Alex, thank you for the work that you do and for giving your time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it and look forward to more conversations like this.